So I want to demonstrate how to start a project, or one way to start a project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show how I might tackle one of the projects that some of you just did, which was the Caesar cipher web UI, and actually that's all I'm going to cover today. I won't actually show how to write the Caesar cipher, but I want to show how to get started on a project. So what I'm going to do is I'm in my code space, and I'm going to use our friend Start Project to get a starter kit. And for this one, I'm sort of assuming we're starting from the point where we're not really super familiar with how to build web pages from scratch. And so I want to do a thing which is a very common technique throughout your programming career, where you start with something, you find some code that maybe you wrote or someone on your team wrote, or you find on the web. So in this case, I've given you a bunch of starter kits. And so we're going to start with the web demos, which actually has a bunch of code in it. And so I'm going to make Caesar demo is the name of my project, and I'm going to start from the web demos project. If I wanted to, I could start from a sort of simpler project and build everything from scratch. But what I want to do is show how we can take existing code that does something like what we want and use that as a jumping off point. So I'm going to run this, start my project. So now I should have a Caesar demo directory, and I can go to the index.js, open a new terminal, and start my server. I've noticed recently that the code spaces doesn't always pop up the thing right away, and it doesn't even necessarily show up here. But if that happens to you, you can notice it says listening on port 3001, click forward port, type in 3001, and it's actually there. So I don't know why it's not noticing automatically anymore, but here we are. Okay, so this is the web demo that had a bunch of stuff in it, had this click counter, had the random color, right? So if you were trying to build something to play with colors, you might want one of these. This one is both colors and a grid. So if you're trying to make a grid-based UI, like a HTML tic-tac-toe game or Minesweeper or something, you might start there. Mouse follower, if you were thinking about like a targeting game, maybe you'd want to start from there. But for me, my idea is, so the whole point of the Caesar cipher is the cipher is something that takes some text and enciphers it, encrypts it according to a key. And in the Caesar cipher, the key is just a number that tells you how many positions to rotate the alphabet. And so you translate a letter in your plain text, the text you want to encrypt, by shifting it that many characters in the alphabet, and then that's your so-called ciphertext. And so my idea for my UI, and this is just I'm imagining, is that I'll have a place where I can type some text, and I'll have some way to indicate what key I'm using, a number from 0 to 25, and then I'll output on the web page the encrypted version of that text. So looking at these UI elements, button, I don't think I really need, unless maybe I want to use a button to say when it's time to encrypt. There's this single line of text, but that's kind of limiting. This text area, though, lets me type multiple lines, and I can paste stuff in there. And then there's menus and checkboxes and radio buttons and stuff that I probably don't need. And then here's an input slider and this color selector I don't need. Okay, so looking at this, I say this text area looks promising, this input type, and then for the output, I just can use a paragraph or something, like we did in the DOM assignment. So what I want to do now is go back and figure out how much of this stuff I can delete out of. All right, I got all of this code, and everything that I was just looking at was under the UI elements, which I can figure out from the URL. It has UI elements, so that directory is the UI elements under public. So and the rest are the other ones that I looked at. So the click counter I don't need. I can right click and say delete permanently, and I also see the command backspace will do that. Do you want to permanently delete? yes, I do. It's not actually irreversible because I already have this stuff committed into Git, so I'm pretty safe with that. The clicker game, as fun as it is, I don't need. The color grid, I don't need. The follow mouse, I don't need. Random color. Styles is not one of the things. That was this is where I have some style sheets. So I'll keep those UI elements, and then the index is the index page that listed all of those things, most of which I just deleted. So I'm going to go ahead and commit this. So if I look in the version control, I see there's a bunch of crossed out files because basically I just deleted a bunch of stuff. And I'm going to commit this just so I have, like, that was one sort of change. So deleting unneeded files. And if we run this again, like the UI elements page should still be there working just the same. And if we actually went back to the index, it's still there, though all of these are going to be missing now, but the UI elements is still there. Okay, so that's fine. So I might as well go ahead, go into this. I could go into the index and just delete all this stuff that I don't need, but actually I don't need this index page at all anymore. So actually what I probably would rather do is take the files that are currently in the UI elements directory and just move them up a level. So I can grab this index, move it up to public, and it'll say, do you want to overwrite the one that's already there? And yes, I do. And then I can take script. Let's see, can I select those together with shift, move them up, and now the UI elements directory is empty, so I can remove that. And now this page will be broken because I moved everything. But if I take that, now the index is what was the UI elements. So that's another good step. And so far I haven't like done anything except delete a bunch of stuff. Moving UI elements up to root. Go ahead and push that. Let's see what else is going on. Okay, so now I actually want to look at the code, and so I'm going to start with the HTML. And so the first thing I can do is I can get rid of all of the elements that I know I don't need. Right, so I decided I wasn't going to use a button. I'm not going to use the simple text input. I am going to keep the text area. I don't need the select. I don't need the checkbox. I don't need the radio buttons. I do need the range, and I don't need the color. And so if I, having deleted all that, come back over here, this page is much simpler. While I'm here, I can also change this text, because we're no longer, we're on our way to Caesar, cipher, and there's another place that appears up here, UI elements. Caesar cipher. Okay, cool. So now if I look, and if I click on this file in the version control, it shows me what I changed. And it basically just shows everything on the left was what was there. The red stuff is deleted. The green stuff on the right is, or the red and the green shows what's changed. So basically I deleted a bunch of stuff. So I'm going to say stripping down index.html. And so this practice of committing frequently is really a good idea. It lets you go back if you need to. You can get back to an earlier version. And also just makes it easier to see what you've changed. Because so now I've sort of locked in this change. And now I can make some more changes, and I'll be able to see exactly what they are without a bunch of other previous changes. Okay, so close this editor. All right, so now what else can I strip out? If I look at this page, now it's got the right title. These text area and input, like that was obviously just, I was labeling that so you all could see what the different things were. If I look in the HTML, I see that in the, looks like here, this is some weird HTML escaping. So that, take those legends out, and probably that goes away. Okay, and so that's also, I'm doing a little experiment, make sure I understand how this HTML works. Field set, I don't really know what that's about. So you might say, let me delete that. Maybe I'll just delete it around one of these, and let's see what happens. Okay, so now I have this whole text area, but I can't, it doesn't work anymore. Maybe, I'm not sure I actually showed how it did. But so I'm going to go over here and hit Command Z to get back to where I was. And so obviously, yeah, so this looks like maybe that field set is used for something. So now maybe I need to turn to the code and see what happens. I want to get rid of those eventually, but obviously I don't want to just break things and then spend a bunch of time not knowing why anything works. So when I break something like I just did, I back out quickly and move and then look somewhere else to make sure I understand what's going on. So now I'm going to look at the script.js and let's see if there's stuff we can delete here. So the very first thing, we see it doing something with the field set, selecting all the field sets, and for each one, appending a div. Okay, so that seems like maybe this thing where the text comes out is in this div that got inserted there. So we're going to leave that alone for a second. Record is making a paragraph, setting its text, adding it to something again to do with the field set. So we're going to have to figure that out at some point. And then there's a bunch of stuff to do with event handlers, which, looking at it, this is pretty general and flexible. As we make a more specific web page, we'll probably be able to rip some of this out. So for starters, this query select all button, that finds all the button elements. Well, there was a button element, but we got rid of it. So I can delete that line, almost certainly. Everything should continue to work fine. That works. That works. Okay. Similarly, this query selector all is selecting all of the inputs or text areas or selects. Well, we got rid of the select at least, so it's not a big change, but might as well make our lives a little bit simpler and get rid of that. And always good form to check. Still works. Great. Let's see what we've changed so far. So we stripped out the legend, and so we'll just call that delete some more stuff. And it's nice to write meaningful messages, but don't spend forever trying to craft deathless prose. We can just go back here. Okay, so now let's look at what's really going on. So this, like I said, is kind of general. This function add on change takes an element and adds a handler for the change event, the on change handler. And that was because the original demo had a whole bunch of elements, and I wanted to basically do the same thing with all of them. So immediately I notice that there's this, we're checking the target attribute type is checkbox, so that means like the thing that's changing. So the event target is a checkbox, and we're going to do this thing. Well, we just deleted all the checkboxes, so we can delete this line of code, which means there's what was in the else was that. And so this phase of deleting everything is, I just want to get things down to the simplest thing that still has the parts I need and get rid of all the extra stuff. Because I don't want to be confused by things or have things break because some code that I'm not even using gets broken in some way. So now this looks a little simpler, but we still have this sort of generic add a thing to all the elements. So I'm going to actually unwind that in the sense of I'm going to make it more specific. And actually that gives me an opportunity to go over to my HTML and say, I'm going to have sort of specific parts of this UI. So the text area, I'm going to give an ID so I can get access to it easily from my JavaScript. I'm going to call it plain text because that's the name for the text that is not encrypted. The input, this slider, is we're going to call the key because that's what it is. And while I'm here, I notice that this input of type range has some attributes that seem relevant, the minimum and the maximum and the value. So for the demo, it was -100 to 100. I said for my keys, I want them to go to 0, meaning don't rotate the alphabet at all, to 25, meaning rotate it almost all the way back around. And we'll set the value to 13, which is right in the middle. And so having the important thing here, though, is I just added these IDs. So now in my script, at the very top, I can say plain text equals document, get element by ID, plain text, and const key equals document, get element by ID key. And now I have two objects that reference those things, which is nice because then I'm going to comment this out for a second, and I'm going to say document, sorry, not document, I'm going to say plain text on change. So this is basically the same thing that happened up here, and in fact I'm going to take what happened up here and copy it. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the key. Oops, I got an extra equal sign there. Copy that. Oops, did it again. All right, so now I've got those two set up. So this line doesn't happen, but we explicitly add essentially the same handler to the two elements that are still in the page. So hopefully everything still works the same as before. So now I can delete this line that I commented out. That also means that add on change isn't used anywhere. So I can delete that whole function. So now I've gotten rid of some code that was kind of complicated, and I didn't even really have to understand it. I just replaced it. I mean, I understood it a little bit, enough to figure out what I wanted to replace it with. Okay, so now we still have this field set thing. So let me go over here, see what I've changed. Right, so this is like switching to IDs on elements. And so now I want to get rid of this field set gorp. Okay, so what's looking a little more carefully at what's going on here, the record function that we call takes an element, which we're getting from the target of the event. So the event that or the element that the event occurred on, so which thing changed, and some text, which we're getting also from the element, and then we're making a new paragraph, we're setting the text of that paragraph, and then we're sticking it in some div that we're finding with a slightly complicated bit of DOM querying, where we're getting the nearest or the closest field set to the element, and then finding a div inside it. It's like, anyway, that's more complicated than we need to be doing. So what we know we want to do, and what I'll do here is I'll copy this, function, make a new one, and I'm gonna I want my function to record ciphertext, because that's what we actually want to do. And we don't actually care what element the event happened on. We just want to know what the text is that we're going to record. And where do we want to stick it? Well, so this demo is sticking it in these dynamic divs and paragraphs, but that's not really what we want. I said originally I wanted to have a text area and a input and then a paragraph. And I'll give it an ID of ciphertext. So that's where I want the stuff to go. So if I look at this page now, there's a paragraph, and what I would like is instead of this text coming out here to come out where that paragraph was. So I'll make the paragraph start out empty, and go back to my code and see if I can't have this record ciphertext put the text that we gave it into that paragraph. And that's pretty easy. If I first come up here and make ciphertext as document, get element by ID, ciphertext, Now I have the object that represents that paragraph. And so here I can say ciphertext inner text equals text. And that will do that. So let's start, see if we can use that. So when the plain text changes, we're going to record the ciphertext, and the text we want is the plain text value, which is another way of saying the e.target.value. But we specifically want, we'll make it a little more clear, it's the value that's coming from the plain text, from the text area. So now, reload, type stuff up here, it comes out down here. So also note, I'm not even messing with like worrying about how to actually do the encryption. I'm just trying to get the basic mechanics of this UI working so that when I type up here and when I change it, something comes out down here. I'll worry later about actually making it be encrypted. This one is still working the same way, so we want to change that. And so that raises the question, what do we want to do when the key changes? And I think what I want to have it do is I want to have it actually also record the ciphertext. So let's just start with that for a second. Actually, that'll be hard to see. So instead, let's do, I'm going to put the key into the string and the text. So I'm going to make a string that has both the key and the text. And I think I probably want to do this for both of these, so we'll make them the same. So now when I change this, oops, haha, that's showing me, I said key, which is the object that represents the element. I don't want the key, I want the key value, same as I want the ciphertext value. Do the same thing up here. Okay, so I try that again. So now when the key comes out and the text, and I change the key, and it also updates in a similar way. So now these two are exactly the same, so I can probably just, feels like I can get rid of, I can just take this and have it go there, and I don't need the text argument to record ciphertext. Same. Great. And now I have also gotten rid of all the calls to record, so I can delete that. And that means that I'm not using these divs here, where the stuff used to get inserted aren't being used. Well, those divs were added up here, so I can delete that. And now there's no references to field set. And so now I can get back to the thing I wanted to do almost at the very beginning, which is get rid of these field set tags, just because they're not relevant to the UI I'm trying to build. And I'd rather have like sort of the simplest possible page, and we'll see what happens to the page when I do that. Some things, the layout changed, and we did inherit a bunch of styles from the demo, but we can always worry about that later. And that's another thing, getting the basic structure in place of the HTML and connecting it to the JavaScript is the first thing. Then I can worry about making it look pretty and deciding exactly how I want to lay it out. And then obviously I have to write the encryption. Okay, so then the last thing of this part, or a couple last things. One, whenever you have an event handler that's just an anonymous function that just calls another function, we don't need the anonymous function. We can assign the value of the function. So take the parentheses off because we're not calling it here. We're just saying, hey, when the plain text changes, call this function. Call the function that's the value of this variable. Same thing here. So now we have both of these set up to put the ciphertext, such as it is, into the ciphertext paragraph. And I'll just add one level of sort of indirection. So I'm going to take this, which is currently our like fake ciphertext, and I cut that. I'm going to make a new function called encrypt that's going to take some text and a key, and eventually it's going to actually do something. For now, and now we're going to pass in the actual text and key, so I don't need this plain text value. But what I am going to do is I'm going to replace what was there before with encrypt the plain text value with the key value. So those now get passed in here, and so we can refer to them here as key and text. This, again, shouldn't have changed the behavior, just restructuring the code a little bit. That changes the key. Okay, so now we have stripped down the code to stuff that is only relevant to our problem. We have the three elements of our page that we care about. We have this event handler that will change the ciphertext output to be whatever the encrypted version of the plain text with the given key. We have a dummy function right now. I'll put a to-do implement Caesar cipher here, and then we wire in the two things. And the only other thing that I didn't look at all was the style sheets. Mostly I'm just going to come in here and say, well, all this field set and legend stuff we don't need. The elements is the elements. There's this div here. I think I'm going to actually just go ahead and delete that, reformat this. So mostly I can get rid of that. One less thing. And it'll probably look in some ways worse. Yeah, it's very like bare bones, no spacing, whatever. Maybe I'll just come over here and quickly text area width 100%, height 100 pixels, just to give it a little bit of style. Okay, so now we have this. We can actually do a similar thing for the ciphertext paragraph. I'll just copy this. We can't see, and then to see, put a border around the paragraph, and now we can see a little bit. Okay, so that's a reasonable, lots of things could be nicer about that. But let's see, so we've stripped that down, done stripping down starter code. Okay, and so that's really all I wanted to show. Obviously, the other big part of this particular project is implementing the Caesar cipher, which is here where this to-do goes. I'm not going to do that in this video because what I really want to show just how to take something that's working, that is in the neighborhood of what you want, and mostly strip it down, get rid of anything that isn't relevant until you have often a very much simpler bit of what you actually need. And because it's been working the whole time, you don't spend as much time sort of debugging and figuring out why nothing works because you have all of this extra code lying around. So I'm going to call it there. Perhaps I will do a part 2 or something where I actually show how to implement the Caesar cipher, or maybe I'll just leave that for you all to figure out yourself. So thanks for watching. I hope you got something out of it, and I'll see you next time.